Joined now by Republican Congressman Mike Johnson, a member of the Judiciary Committee and chairman of the House GOP Study Committee. Good evening, sir. Thanks for coming on the beat.
Hey, Ari, great to be with you.
Happy to have you. We always like to get into this. A huge fight, obviously, in Congress, this vote Wednesday. Do you think any of the evidence that's come out against Donald Trump on the issues of the alleged abuse of power or alleged obstruction of Congress are concerning? Does any of it concern you, or do you feel he has a clean book of health going into the floor vote?
I really do believe he has a clean bill of health. Now, and this is why I say this, Ari, before you attack my premise, okay? I sat through 14 hours of the House Judiciary Committee last week. As you know, hundreds of hours have gone into this, but what they produced for us is, as Professor Turley said, he was our expert witness in the House Judiciary about 2 weeks ago. He said this is the fastest impeachment on the thinnest evidentiary record and the narrowest grounds in the history of impeachments. This has never happened in 243 years, and I don't think there's anything there to show an impeachable offense. I don't think they have direct evidence, and for that reason, I think Donald Trump should be acquitted.
When you look at the direct evidence they have on withholding the money and then asking for the Biden investigation, do you think it is wrong for a president to ask for an investigation of a rival like that?
Yeah, I heard your previous segment, and I heard Rob Reiner and your discussion you had with him, and he said if you're digging up dirt and you're trying to affect the outcome of an election coming forward, look, none of that is in this record. It's just not. And if anybody watched the 14 hours of our Judiciary Committee hearing where we went through every jot and tittle of the evidence, that's not there. Now, some people had conjecture and speculation.
Let's get into that specifically, which is why I think I want viewers to hear from you.
Sure.
What do you think, though, of the president using his powers to get Ukraine to investigate the Bidens and announce it? You don't dispute that was his goal.
No, I don't, but I think there are some very important facts in the record that show the full context of that, and I don't think you can review this in isolation. One of the important facts is both President Trump and President Zelensky said very clearly there was no pressure exerted. The Ukraine officials didn't know that military aid was being temporarily delayed. There never was an investigation that began. They actually did get the military aid. In fact, they got the missiles they needed to properly defend themselves, and they got the meeting in the White House.
So let's go through a couple. You just mentioned several things. Pentagon officials and others testified under oath that not only did they know they didn't get the money, they were asking about it. So the fairest way to put that is your claim is at least disputed by others under oath. With regard, though, to the pressure, I mean, Ukraine didn't get the money. They still don't have all the money. Do you think they should get all the money that was initially withheld by the Trump administration?
I think they should get the money that Congress appropriated for that purpose. I do think, and I believe that what the president was after was some security for those funds. You know, he's famous for this, wanting to protect the treasure of American taxpayers. When we send our money overseas, and I think everybody should want whomever the president is to guard this jealously, we don't want our money being squandered. Ukraine, remember, was listed as the third most corrupt country in the world. Zelensky came in as a reformer, and the President Trump, wanted to make sure that he was genuine in that regard. Well, when he found that out, he released it.
Here's why I think people have a hard time squaring that. Everyone knows that by now there's this process in place to deal with checking the corruption. As you mentioned, it's mandated by law, and the president's own call notes have him saying he wants the Biden-Burisma probe, not corruption indeed. And we checked this. I'm curious your response. When you actually look at the call, there's zero references to corruption in the entire call, and that's the White House's own evidence. And then you mentioned the money. You voted against the continuing appropriations, which has many issues, including the Ukraine money. So I guess I give you a chance to speak to that. If Ukraine should get the money, why did you vote against them getting it in that CR?
Well, Ari, you've been around this town a long time. You know that these big spending bills often are omnibuses or mini buses, as we call them, and there's lots of things loaded onto there. So you can't take one issue in isolation. We vote on large spending measures.
Sure.
That's the
answer. So you were
to that.
for, and I just in fairness then, so you were for Ukraine getting the money. You were against other stuff in that vote on that bill?
Yes, of course. Okay. Look, Ukraine has this aggressor, Russia, right over their shoulder, and they're an ally of ours, and we do need to assist them. But I, like most American citizens, want to know that when we send the funds over there, it's not going to be squandered by their political corruption. And there's a lot of corruption going on. Among that was this very suspect situation about Burisma, which is an infamously corrupt corporation, and Hunter Biden gets put on the board with no experience, no background in oil and gas, and he's paid $80,000 a month. I mean, that does raise questions, and anybody that's looking at it objectively, I think, would agree with that.
Well, I think that raises two questions. You say it raises some. One question is, if this is such an important issue to the U.S., why not have the U.S. investigated, as you, I think, would concede. It's pretty unusual to ask a foreign government to outsource to do the work, and then you get into the goal was apparently, and again, if Ambassador Sondland was lying, I assume the president should say so and fire him. That hasn't happened. Let's look at Ambassador Sondland and others saying under oath the goal was just to announce the investigation to dirty up the Bidens. It didn't matter whether it got done. That's their testimony. Take a look.
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
This was a demand that President Zelensky personally commit on a cable news channel to a specific investigation of President Trump's political rival.
If they're telling the truth under oath, that really undercuts that defense of the president, doesn't it?
No, because as we said in our hearing over and over, you can't take Sondland out of context either. You got to take the full Sondland, as we said. And what he said, the only direct evidence, aside from his speculation, conjecture that he readily admitted, was when he asked the president on September 9th, what do you want? And the president famously said, I don't want a quid pro quo. I don't want anything. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. That is consistent with what he's always said, what he's always stood for, this America First idea that he has, the theme that he's always projected, that we want to make sure that
and if that's true, and viewers can make up their own minds because we have a big country here, everyone can make up their own mind. But if what you're saying is true, then why not bring Sondland, Mulvaney, Giuliani, the people with the knowledge to go testify in the Senate trial, clear it up under oath?
Look, I'm not opposed to that. I think a lengthy
You're for
trial
Mulvaney testifying.
I'm for all of it. If you're going to have a trial, let's have all the witnesses. I don't think the president's afraid of that at all. But the ultimate concern is, and this is what the ultimate answer is as well, the founders warned us against a single-party impeachment because they thought it would rip the country apart. They were afraid that it would divide the people. And that's what we're seeing right now, let's be honest. If we drag the trial out, and everybody already assumes that the outcome is decided going in, does that behoove the country? Does it behoove us to bring Hunter and Joe Biden in for questioning? Well, I'd like to hear what they have to say.
I can't answer that, but you're on record saying you disagree with the president. He should make Mulvaney available tonight.
No, I'm saying, look, it's ultimately up to the Senate on the length of the trial and the witnesses that they come to. I'm saying there's no fear of that because I don't think Mr. Mulvaney or anybody has anything to hide.
Congressman Johnson, we've been inviting you on. You've come on, which I appreciate. I hope you'll come back on the beat after your debut tonight, sir.
I've enjoyed it, Ari. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.